seated. Bob Hart is the guy who's put time and attention into this issue of the 762 bill. So, with no further ado, take it away, Bob.
Thank you, Ray. Good evening. My name is Bob Hart. I'm a recently retired land use planner. I've worked both in the light and in the dark. I was a county planner for 20 years. I've written a number of rules and regulations over my time and found that a lot of it is based on good ideas that have gone wrong. Here's some examples. In Chico, California, it's illegal to build, maintain, and use a nuclear weapon. Not only is it illegal, it carries a $500 fine. In Idaho, it's the only state that has a law on the books that bans cannibalism. Technically, it says it's not a crime in the rest of the nation, and cannibalism is defined the non-consensual consumption of another human being. So I guess if you get your buddy's permission, you can eat his tenderloin. That just makes no sense to me, but it starts out with a good idea. In Oregon, it's considered a speed racing offense if you participate in the test of physical endurance on a highway. I don't know what that means. Physical endurance, is that grabbing the steering wheel with your teeth, and how long can you hold it? I don't know. And boxing with a kangaroo is illegal in Myrtle Creek. Those are some real laws on the books. And that's what happened here, is the idea is trying to deal with wildfire. Because we know there is fire danger here in Southern Oregon. It's just a fact of life. And the question is, how do we deal with it? What should we do? And is the Senate bill, the way it was drafted, something that is the right way to approach it? In my estimation, it's a bit overzealous, overkill, and it needs to be fixed. One way is to try and repeal the whole thing. The other is to try and piecemeal it and fix different parts. Because there are some good things in the bill, contrary to popular belief. There's things about trying to deal with smoke, people that have lung problems, that the health authority can try and fix buildings to where they're smoke-proofed during a fire, that people can go stay, just like warming centers during the winter. And if you're an individual, possibly having a single unit for it at your home. So how did we get started with this? We can start with a testimony that was submitted. Matthew, next slide. I went on the website and found out this was considered during the 2021 legislative session. The Capitol was closed to people, so everything was done over Zoom. There wasn't the ability for everybody to go see what was going on and to provide testimony. When I looked through the things, it listed 50 individuals or groups that submitted to testimony, and 25 were from organized groups in support. They have skin in the game. They have an axe to grind. They're fully supportive of what was adopted. There was a couple of people that were opposed to it. There was a few groups that were opposed to different parts of it, but not to the whole thing. So it was my consideration that there was not a lot of public awareness to the full, robust understanding of what this bill did. Like I said, it was introduced in the 2021 session. It was signed into law on July 19th. It was submitted in February as a placeholder, what they call a gut and stuff, where it just says that we're going to do a study for the utility companies to make sure that during times of a high fire danger that the utility companies aren't going to start a fire, so they were going to do a study. About 2 months later, that was withdrawn and a whole bill was put in. It's 24 pages. It was adopted and signed into law as an emergency ordinance. Next slide. I guess I better talk fast. No, we'll be here for a bit. One of the big parts of this whole thing was the definition or a mapping of where high fire danger was. The law says there's supposed to be 5 different classifications: no impact, low impact, medium impact, high risk, and extreme risk. So letters were sent to the high and extreme risk people, property owners, and that covered most all of Southern Oregon. And when these letters were submitted to people, they said, we're going to do some meetings with folks to explain what this is all about. The first meeting was scheduled for Grants Pass, and it was canceled the day the meeting was scheduled. They were saying that they received threats because of the people that were very upset with what this map was. They didn't believe it. They thought it was not truly done, and they were, well, to put it bluntly, they were as mad as hell. It says there were documented inadequacies, and so the next night, after the first one was canceled, they had a meeting scheduled for Medford. That one was changed to a Zoom meeting at the last minute as well. They had over 1,200 people registered on the Zoom meeting with 600 people wanting to testify. Most of them didn't get a chance to testify. After that was done, they had a few more meetings throughout other parts of the state, but it seemed like the ire was really raised here in Southern Oregon. Based on the inaccuracies and the people complaining, State Forestry issued a press release last Thursday that the map has been withdrawn and things have been rescheduled. The map was withdrawn in August, so it was kind of crickets between August 4th and the first part of September when they said we're going to release the new map. Like I said, that notification came out last Thursday. Next slide. And here's what they said. From now, October through February of next year, we'll have public and stakeholder engagement, outreach and education, wildfire science, risk mitigation outreach, education. And so they're supposed to be having some feedback, some interactions between now and February before they publish a new map. And the new map is supposed to come out March 1st of next year. And it's supposed to be a draft map and not the final map like the original rollout was. So there's supposed to be time for interaction and talking to folks of what to do next. Next slide. After that rollout in March through September, they're supposed to have more public outreach and engagement, talking with people, government agencies, local folks, fire marshals, and to talk about the draft map and the related topics to include building codes and defensible space standards. Those are the things that are going to affect you directly. Next. A final map is going to be issued in October, and at that point, a 60-day appeal period will be initiated. So if you disagree with the map designation that applies to your property, you can file an appeal. All the appeals that were submitted after the first map, those have all been eliminated. So you have to start from scratch. They're not going to consider those during the next phase of this. Next slide. So what's happening now is 11 state agencies are still going forward. They're not in a mode of we're going to wait till next year to do something. They are doing things and having hearings now and considerations. So if we're going to talk about these other things that need to be done, now's the time to do it. We don't want to wait till next year because they're going to be doing defensible space and building codes. The state fire marshal, he's supposed to come up with defensible space, and it's supposed to be done by the end of December of this year. And the things that are supposed to happen in defensible space is required to modify vegetation. Trees will be allowed. They said it's not supposed to be moonscape where you scrape everything to the ground, but trees are supposed to be spaced 10 feet apart, 10 feet away from your structures. You're supposed to limb things up at least 6 feet from the ground. Additional things like here, dead wood and litter is supposed to be regularly removed. You can't have, quote, ornamental vegetation in this area around your structures. And what they require is in the extreme risk areas, it's to be maintained with a 100-foot radius around all the buildings. That's where you're supposed to modify all of your vegetation to make sure fire won't go from vegetation to your dwelling. In the high fire danger areas, it's a 50-foot radius. I know we've run into the issue before because most counties, well, everyone that I've dealt with over the years, they have their own fuel break setbacks. Jackson County has one on the books now. Josephine County has one on the books now. Klamath County has one on the books now. Douglas County has it on the books now. So why they have come and said, we want this new thing of defensible space when it's already there, it just seems redundant. But they said, well, we've got to have at least minimum standards. We're going to establish those at a state level, which is how the Oregon land use system seems to work. Everything is adopted at a state level, and then the local government agencies are supposed to conform to what the state requires to be done. Next slide. Oh, I did say distance will terminate at the property line. So if your house is less than 100 feet from a property line and you're an extreme, they won't make you go on your neighbor's property to clear the vegetation. At one point, there was a requirement that you had to get an easement to go trim brushes and vegetation on your neighbor's property. But the Jackson County, they went through a thing that they call a fuel break reduction. So you can talk to the local fire district. They'll come out and look and see if there's a way to deal with it. So, like I said, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have the state step in. But in the way the law is written, it says if you do not conform to the requirements, they may develop and apply fees for noncompliance. It's been my experience that land use has always gotten more difficult over time. It's never gotten less difficult, ever. So this statement of they may require it, I think is a fallacy. They are going to do it. You had a question. Yes and no. The new construction we're going to get into, and that's in the building hardening. This vegetation management applies to all structures, existing or new. What's going to happen is when this whole thing comes into fruition, then the fire marshal will send people out and they will inspect your property for compliance. They don't say that they're going to issue a certificate. It just says that they're going to work with folks to try and get them into compliance, and it's supposed to be an educational system. We'll see if that's how it actually works in practice. You had a...
Do you know if the local authorities, the local administration, municipality, whatever it might be, sends their fire people out to your property and
Possibly, because the way it is written, it says the fire marshal has the authority to do the inspections, but they also have the authority to delegate those inspections to the local governments and the local fire districts and the local fire protection providers. So if there is a robust system like District 3 or whatever, I would imagine that they would be able to do that. We're going to have to wait and see. There's a lot of mays and could-bes and authorized, but it doesn't say specifically that the fire marshal will retain that forevermore. It says they may delegate it. Yes, sir.
What parts are grandfathered in?
For vegetation, nothing is grandfathered in. Absolutely nothing. What we have, they will have some grants available, and they will start with schools and hospitals, senior facilities, low income, limited English proficiency, where they will have some grant money available if you need some help to try and do this vegetation management. But you'll have to file for it, and I don't know what the ultimate budget's going to be, and it's going to vary from year to year, I'm sure. Counties can adopt higher standards than what are in the code at the state level. So if we find something here in Jackson County that we feel is more critical than what happens in the state standard, like I know there is a provision in the local codes that if you're on a steep slope, that you may have to clear down 150 feet instead of 100 feet on the downslope side away from your structure, because fire runs up a hill real quick, so they want a little bit bigger space there. So like I said, the local jurisdictions can adopt some higher standards, and that's between us and the county to talk about that. Next. Here's where we get into grandfathering, if you will. Building Code Division is to adopt what they call home hardening requirements. These will be a mandatory code provisions for wildfire per the R327 of the Specialty Code. And this will apply to all new construction. The new construction will have to meet the new standards. Code provisions will apply when you do an addition to an existing structure. So if you have a barn or a shop and you need to add on to it, then you have to bring it up to code. And it's not clear in my reading of the code of whether you have to bring the whole building up to code or just that area that you're adding on. Makes not a lot of logical sense that you only do that addition. So I would think when it gets clarified, if you add on to an existing structure, you're going to have to do the entire area. And this code will apply to lots designated high or extreme risk. And there's another thing that I didn't put on here. Government loves acronyms. The WUI, which is the Wild Urban Interface. There's supposed to be another subset in the high and extreme area where houses are more densely packed, and it says that this will apply if you're in the WUI, if you're in the high, or if you're in the extreme. If you're not in those areas, it wouldn't apply unless the county adopts more stringent regulation. But a lot of that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because the definition that they took for the WUI does not come from land use. It comes from forestry and how they identify the difference between forest land and developed land. And at first it says the WUI would be, the Wild Urban Interface, would be where the forest or rural areas come up to densities of 1 house per 10 acres, which is fairly compact. but that didn't get them enough area to be looked at. So they changed the definition during this exercise for one house at 40 acres is the WUI, which to me is not urban. Urban in the classical land use system is where you have urban services, sewer, water, storm drains, all the urban services that everybody's used to, sidewalks, things like that. So it was supposed to be more compact around cities, but now they're using this definition of a WUI to go out and get into the rural area to try and affect where people live away from the cities. Not the way that I'd like to live, but that's their idea. The other parts of the code is you have to have a roof that meets the new standards. And if you're replacing part of your roof, if you go over 50%, you've got to replace the whole thing, even if it doesn't need a full review. Next. Other things that are in the building code section is gutters must be non-combustible and have coverings to prevent leaves or debris. Ventilation shall not be installed on the underside of eaves. If there's ventilation screens, it's got to be 16th to an 1/8 inch opening, so it gets relatively tight. Walls must be non-combustible material or ignition resistant, heavy timber or log wall. An approved assembly would use type X 5/8 sheetrock. It has to be an approved 1 hour fire resistive gypsum panel. Yes, sir.
So what do they want us to do, rebuild our entire house?
The covering on the outside, if you're going to do an addition to your house. If you're not going to add to the house or change it, you're not required to do this.
What about the roofing?
The roofing, if you have to do a roof replacement, if you replace more than 50%, it's going to have to meet current code standards. Yes.
So my asphalt shingles are okay?
What was that again, sir?
My asphalt shingles are okay?
If they meet Class A or Class B standard.
All asphalt shingles are class B.
Next slide. Exceptions. If it's a 200 square foot or smaller building and it is more than 50 feet from other structures. So if you need to put a well house around a well and it's less than 200 square feet and over 50 feet from existing structure, you don't have to harden that structure. But if it's less than 50 feet or over 200, then it applies. The other things that they look at is walkways and porches and balconies must be fire-resistant treated wood or non-flammable materials. And the underside has to be hardened so you don't have exposed areas for fire to catch. Windows must be double pane or tempered glass. And the rules are supposed to be finalized by October 1st and effective April 1st. The Oregon Home Builders Association estimated at a 400 square foot house, the new rules will increase the cost to construct by $8,200. So it's not cheap. Yes, ma'am.
Is it conceivable that the insurance companies, fire insurance, could then tell the homeowners that we're not going to insure your property if it does not meet these rules on existing homes? Not doing any remodeling, any structural changes, but I personally see that as something that is conceivable of happening in the somewhat near future.
That's one of the things that we get conflicting stories back and forth. In the new law, it says that the state will talk to the insurance companies, coordinate with them to make sure that this does not drive insurance costs, because they know it's a concern. But it doesn't say that it won't go up. We've heard numbers of stories of people, especially from the real estate community, saying that when they've tried to sell properties, that insurance companies are refusing to write binders. We've heard people say that their fire insurance has gone up or they've been canceled. The state has said that they talked to insurance companies. They said, well, it wasn't because of your new fire maps and stuff. That was just something that has nothing to do with it. So that's still something that's up in the air. We don't know what the final fallout's going to be. I hope it's not going to turn into a thing like flood insurance, where if you're out in a fire area that you're going to have to get high value fire insurance like flood insurance. 2 questions over here.
I've been a mortgage lender for over 23 years, and when grants passed changed fire districting, the way they have their fire services, I saw all kinds of people have their homeowners insurance quadrupled.
So, and that's just the reality of things. Nobody's got anything in writing that says things won't change, or put a cap on it or anything else. That's still to be discussed, and that's one of the things we're going to ask you to get involved in toward the end of the meeting. Yes, ma'am. That's one of the things that I know from the research that I've been doing about this is I know in California that some of the insurance companies take into consideration if people do hardening and do that defensive space around structures that their insurance has gone down and they've kept it low. But that's on an individual basis, and it's not here yet. The state of Oregon, with their Public Utility Commission, they check rates and things like that. So there's still ongoing discussions. I don't think that's been settled. And that's all I can tell you at this point is it's still up for discussions. Yes. Next. This is the concern that I have. This is the land use part of it. And what I've seen in it, in the law, the way it's written, especially around the wildfire defensive space, it says specifically in the law that you cannot use the criteria for defensive space to deny a permit or an approval. So if you didn't have your defensive space done, they can't deny your permit. But then in the next paragraph, it says in the land use system, they can use that criteria for approval review if it's a land use issue. So zoning and planning codes are different from building and fire life safety codes for the state fire marshal. And this is the area that is a complete unknown in my estimation. Because it says they're going to review and make recommendations to the legislature of what needs to be done to zoning codes to address wildfire hazards. Issues include defensible space, building codes, safe evacuations, and what they call development considerations, which is a great big box that can have anything thrown in it. Development considerations can deny building on property in extreme or wildfire areas if you don't meet the criteria that we're going to have. Next. Reasons to deny development can include substandard roads, lack of structure fire companies or a fire district. In Josephine County, most of the county is not in a fire district. They're covered by rural metro by private contract. So there's no guarantee that you're going to have fire protection. The county has gone out numerous times to see if they should form fire districts, and the people have always voted it down. How that's going to play out in this, we don't know. Other things that can affect land use regulations, surrounding vegetation, lack of water storage. If you're in a box canyon or a lack of secondary access in an emergency, if you're in steep slope. They had a public Zoom meeting to discuss the draft of this legislation or recommendation at the Land Conservation Development Department. It was held in John Day last week with Zoom if you wanted to try and watch it. So it wasn't really easy for most people to get there to testify in person. There was a few people, but not much. The report needed to be submitted to the legislature no later than October 1st. So you got, what, a week? The other part was the Department of Land Conservation Development that wrote the report, their comment period for their draft report ended on the 16th. And they were making recommendations to their commission on the 22nd. So from the 16th to the 22nd was 6 days with a weekend in between. So they had 3 days to look at the rest of the testimony that was being submitted and incorporate anything. There weren't any changes. Next. The things that will affect you, the power system, the Public Utility Commission is to require plans from the power company on how to harden their electrical facilities to include line maintenance and inspections, as well as vegetation management. Costs incurred in the upgrade and increased maintenance to be recovered by increased rates to the payers or the customers. So your electric bill is going to go up to cover what the power companies are going to do to the facilities. To me, it's a part of the entire grid system, and some of that should be covered by general government funds. We had a big infrastructure bill come from Washington, and I don't see anything earmarked to try and deal with hardening of the systems for electrical generation. Next. Sir.
The PUC, isn't that a requirement already for utilities to harden their system?
Yeah, they're doing it right now out in Army around our home. They're clearing around the power poles, and any power pole that has a fuse on it, they're clearing underneath it.
Right.
Not
So.
late in the year, but they're doing it right now.
Well, I think part of it is the utility commission. Part of it was the things that happened in California and the liability that they've incurred. So they're trying to get ahead of the curve, which is not a bad thing. It's just, where does all the money come from to do all these things?
My point is they're already required under their existing rules.
But they're going to.
Without increasing the rates, it's in there, embedded in their current agreements and the current rate structure. So I don't know what this is.
This.
We have two separations. The normal tree maintenance to see up high 10 feet around the power lines, that's ongoing and consistent. In the last 2 years, they've done the stuff on the ground kind of as a secondary thing. I'm not sure we're paying for it. It's just having that person separate it out.
Like they say, there's no such thing as a free lunch. The other part of the legislation says that the power companies are to develop the protocol on how and when to de-energize during wildfire danger. They've already done some of that here in Oregon, of turning off the power when it's high fire time, high winds, increased temperatures, things like that. So it's one of the things that, can it become the normal to have it pulled out. A concern that I have is what they call unintended consequences. Because if they turn off the power from Pacific Power and your well is no longer functioning, your refrigerator is no longer functioning, your freezer is no longer functioning, your food's starting to go bad, how many portable generators are going to be fired up and around in the areas that they're turning the power off, and can that lead to even more problems than what they're doing? I think this needs a better understanding of what to do and how to do it. I think they're trying to do a quick hit, get off the stage so they don't get run through the ringer. Next, state forestry protection. The state forestry is to provide basic wildfire protection outside of urban areas, with cost to be paid by the property owner. It could be a lien against the property. Prior to SB 762, there's a $25 a year cap on what the property owner could be charged. That $25 a year cap has been removed. So the legislature in Senate Bill 762. So in this bill, there's a lot of new expenses to the fire, to the forestry department in the way of increased manpower. They're talking about doubling the size of state forestry, bringing more aircraft in, more administration, more remote sensing for fires. And all this costs money, and it's going to fall on the property owner to do that, because it's going to be in their budget. They're going to budget so much a year for these new things that they're going to be doing. And if they go over budget, the way the legislation is written, and those cost overruns, it'll just roll over to the next year's budget and get added in. So you either pay me now or pay me later. That's the way it's going to work. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
And they say the crowns can't touch?
It's supposed to have 10 feet separation between crowns.
Yeah, the crowns.
Yeah.
And I've got trees this big around.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how much is it going to cost to knock one of those down when I got like maybe 20 of them? $6,000. Right? And I've got trees that are next to my property, shade by the house, you know, big oak trees, been 40-something years.
Yep.
I've got 50 feet, or closer than 50 feet of big, beautiful cedar tree, all that kind of stuff. And they have clearings all around my property, grass and stuff like that, but I've got some trees close to the house, I've got sheds, I've got trees next to them.
And we'll see how this plays out, because this is the concern that I run into is, what does the code say? It says 10 feet separation between the crowns of trees and between the trees and structures. I went to the state fire marshal's presentation at Hendrick Junior High School when this first came out in July, and the state fire marshal said, we're going to work with you folks. We don't want moonscapes. We're not going to make you cut down all your trees. When we come out, we'll try and do what they call best practices and work with you. What that is going to actually apply on the ground and what the words say, I don't know where that balance is going to be and what's going to happen. Some of it could depend on the inspector that you happen to draw. Yeah, and it does provide in the statute that there are going to be some funds available to try and help people to do some of that. How much of that is going to actually materialize, we don't know, but they say it's going to get fixed, and we're going to have to ask those questions hard to the legislators so they can clarify what that means and how they're going to do it. Lady in the back next.
So I'm from Josephine County, and in my county we have a ordinance this bill, SB762, is a government overreach into this bill that we already have in Josephine County. I don't know if Jackson County has it or not, but I'd be more than welcome to write the phone number, and you guys can get a hold of the guy to maybe they can come out and evaluate your properties too, and give you guys an idea of what is to be expected under this current administration. Because SB762 has not been effective yet until 2023, but this has been in effect since 2003.
There's all kinds of questions like that, and those are the things that we need to ask those questions. How is that going to?
That's what I'm trying to say, is that you call it ODF, the funding is there, just that nobody's using the program and nobody's educated about the program. That's there, and that's the reason why these guys are getting away with what they're getting away with, is because nobody knows about this particular administration that covers at least Josephine County.
Well, in
That budget in the state forestry is a limited amount every year. It only covers a certain amount of acreage, and most of it is forest land. And it's how it's doled out, and it's not a total coverage of costs, it's a partial share.
in the statute, it says there's going to be programs for small woodlot areas for over here in the western side for parcels that are 160 acres or smaller, and over on the east side of 640 acres. So they make a difference, but there is a program to try and minimize fire potential in small woodlots. Gentleman with the hat, you're next.
There should be, if you're writing this bill, there should be a heavy emphasis on grant money. Because we're on 40 acres, property was developed in '89. It's heavily treed. We can do it. We had arborists out 3 years ago for 2 days to take down some trees, cost us $13,000. We cannot do this. The fines better be reasonable, because we're not gonna be able to meet any standards without some grant money.
We're going to have to see how that whole thing plays out of how much grant money per year and how do they dole those out, how do they pick high and low. And the other thing, what they call equity, that they're going to try and deal with low income areas and things that service the community. So we'll see how that wording plays out when they get to the details. Because what we have now is a series that was adopted in law, and what comes next is what they call administrative rules that gets into the details of how those things are figured out. Those haven't been written yet, and that's what we need to have in that dialogue between you, the citizens, and the state now, so they understand your concerns, so when those rules do get written, that they will understand where the conflicts and things are. Next, right behind you. Yes, sir.
State, federal, and counties are exempt from all this, right?
Go to the state park, how's the state park gonna work? They won't need it, and they have open.
What part of the issue that I see is some of it is in wooded areas and what to do about those woodlots, and the other part is a lot of this is focused on close proximity to structures. In a lot of the state parks or in the federal land, there's not a lot of buildings, so they're not going to do anything because they're not close to the houses. So that's a whole nother issue that we'll get into in a little bit. Yeah.
My property borders on state park.
Mm-hmm.
There are several trees less than 50 feet from, I have a 30 by 60 shop. And along there's at least 3 trees that are less than 50 feet from my shop. And will the state be required to take those trees out?
No. Well, if it's over 50 feet from your shop, If you're in a high area, you don't have to take the trees out. What they call defensible space is within 50 feet in the high risk areas around your structures, not your whole lot. If you've got 10 or 20 or 30 acres, it's around. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So this is all highlighting how this is a terrible government overreach into our private property usage. And as he's talking about this whole thing is that when it plays out and see how it's going to play out. Right. I say we don't let it play out. Right. Yeah.
I agree.
I want to know and get the chase of how do we repeal this? How do we stop it? And how do we stop the government overreach?
And
I want to have Jeff Bolton up here.
Well, we're going to get into what can we do in a little bit. Yes, ma'am. We'll get there.
Question. Through all of this discussion and the meetings I've gone to, there's not one word about irrigated land. It seems to me that if your land is irrigated, you shouldn't have to do any of this. That was one of the big complaints about the map, that it was not ground checked to see if there were fire areas with that irrigated land. So that's something that's supposed to be addressed when the thing's done. So we'll have a place for more questions in a little bit. Let me get through the rest of the presentation. I think we're getting close to where we're at here. One of the things in this bill is state forestry is to make rules about prescribed burns and training people to be prescribed burn managers. And one of the new parts to the rules about prescribed burns is you can go across property lines if you have the permission of those property owners. But to try and protect the managers, it says you would have to show negligence on his part if something would happen and the burn would get away, like it did in New Mexico, and it burned hundreds of thousands of acres. There's no provision in here for any liability insurance for anybody doing a prescribed burn. Do you drive a car with no liability insurance? I think this is one of the things that they need to cover, that they haven't yet. Next one, Matthew. Let's see, like I said, there are other parts to this program. The ones that I tried to highlight are the ones that will affect private property owners most. The parts about the air quality things, they're not really going to affect you as a private property owner because they're not requiring everybody to retrofit their house with air quality monitors and equipment. That's your taxes at work. And that's it. Next slide. I thought there was some other ones in there, but well, I've got them on here. One of the things when I went to deal with the land use sections, because everybody says, well, this will only apply to the extreme and high risk areas. There's a multi-page letter from 1,000 Friends of Oregon submitted in, and here's their comments. Some commenters have stated that DLCD is limited to making recommendations that only the high and extreme fire risk areas. This is not accurate. SB762 directs DLCD to look beyond just the high and extreme wildfire areas. It's to, without regard of risk classification, identify updates to the statewide land use planning program and local comprehensive plans and zoning codes that are needed in order to incorporate wildfire risk maps and minimize wildfire risk.
So there's a movement from environmental groups or land use watchdog activity groups that are trying to push this past just the extreme and the high. I have my own suspicions that this is part of an issue to try and drive people out of the rural areas and into the cities. So we need to respond and talk to those folks on what's going on. And what I wanted to do right now, before we get into that last part, is we have a few people here that either currently hold office or are running for office that will have a direct impact on what happens with 762 and its implementation. So I'm going to ask them to come up and spend 5 minutes apiece to explain where they are in this process before we get to the what do we do. Kim, you want to start? This is Representative Kim Wallen.
How's that? No? Maybe he's going to turn me up. There we go.
There we go.
Hi, everyone. Raise your hand if you live in Senate District 3. Raise your hand if you have no idea if you live in Senate District 3. There we go. If you live in Senate District 3, I'm going to tell you where it is. That's Jeff Golden's district. Your job is to get him defeated. That's how this bill goes away. This bill goes away without Jeff Golden. So if you live anywhere from the Klamath-Jackson County boundary on the south end of the east-west boundary with Klamath County, Ashland, Talent, Phoenix, all the land in between, Barnett Road south in Medford to the California border. So Medford, the outlying area of Medford, Jacksonville, the city of Medford. If you live in any of that, you live in Senate District 3. That is Jeff Golden's district. Ashland votes, almost 100% of the people vote every single election. There's no anti-Jeff Golden votes to go get there. They vote 85% Democrat, 15% Republican. When Republicans have tried to win Ashland, they've moved that needle 1 or 2%. 16 to 84. That's how that goes. My neighborhood, which is southeast Medford, also votes like that. Not the same percentage as Republican Democrat, but 98% of the people there vote. There's not a lot of votes to go get there. But there are a lot of votes to go get in West Medford. Everything west of the freeway. Lots of Trump flags, lots of non-voters. So make sure that you know that everybody you know who lives in that area is voting for Randy Sparacino, who's here tonight. Jeff Golden and his friends, he has a friend from KS Wild who also happens to be an Oregon State University professor in forestry. They've been cooking this bill up for 20 years. They don't believe in private property rights, so when you feel like your private property rights are being threatened, you're right. They are. And when you think it's unfair that you're going to bear the cost of cleaning out the forest and the state and the county and the public property owners are not, you're right. That's the plan. That's the plan they've made up for a long, long time. Robin's pointing at something. Senator Golden, we're trying to defeat you because we hate this bill, and you know that. I voted no on this bill because I knew this was all in it. And as you can tell, I say all these. I have a reputation for being a bold speaker. And Senator Golden, I'll say it to your face. I'd say it behind your back. We hate this bill. And so, at the end of the day, I hope it can be fully repealed. There are other ways to manage forest fires, to manage smoke, to manage forests than this bill. It doesn't have to be this way. You can look that up on Orstar. That's all public record.
Not like to get involved in that kind of an interaction.
Right, I agree.
This was supposed to explain what this bill is about, what it will impact you with, and give some people a chance to explain.
I have one more little thing to say, and I am a huge proponent of grassroots efforts. They make a difference. It was the grassroots efforts, it was those 1,200 people on that Zoom call that got the maps suspended. That is how that happened. So all of your efforts to lobby the legislature, to lobby all of the rules that are going to get made by the 11 agencies that were referred to at the beginning of this evening, all of them have to go through a public comment time. All of them do. Public comment makes a difference. Make sure it's hard to keep track of 11 agencies who are all making rules and trying to figure out when the public comment time is open and how to make that public comment. And I do my best to try to keep people notified of that on my digital newsletter. If you haven't subscribed to that, you should. But I miss them. I miss it. I know Commissioner Roberts does a good job of keeping track of that as well. Make public comments. You don't have to show up to the meeting. There will be a public meeting. You can also submit written testimony about how these things affect you. So grassroots matters. When legislators like me and Senator Golden hear from the public, it does make a difference. I want you to know that. So please do stay involved. One more question, and then my time is up.
Last 2 months, personally spoken with Senator Golden about his current views about Senate Bill 762.
I have not. Senator Golden and I have a hard time connecting for whatever reason. That's, I hope he plans to modify it at least. Certainly my caucus is hoping to repeal it entirely and go a different direction. If we can't do that, I hope we can seriously modify its effects, make it go a lot slower. The perception is in the public is not that this is the way to manage the smoke, that there are other better ways to do it, and I hope we can get there. And my time is up for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Oregon's supposed to be a state where we allow people to speak their mind and speak their piece. And in fairness, Mr. Golden? And I do appreciate, no, Bob Hart. Ron Smith was sick. He couldn't make it tonight. Thank you for what you did on the Zoom call, that you got on there, tried to explain, and you stood up to the heat, and appreciate that part.
I thought I could use another dose tonight, so come on by.
I didn't bring the baseball bat, but we've got a microphone. How about
I
that?
appreciate it, and I don't think I'll take 5 minutes. We'll see. I only saw a little notice about this meeting a couple hours ago at the Phoenix Library, so I thought I'd stop by, listen, try to answer some questions if I could. I don't think I can completely, I know I can't completely explain this bill in 5 minutes, but I do want to hear from people. You know, this the senatorial district, along with one other, the one around Bend, is considered the one with the most mixed opinions of any in the state. And I know that I have some disagreements with some people in the room, probably on a number of issues. But it's my responsibility to listen and think hard about what the people I represent think. So let me say a couple things. I will say that I think it's really hard to have a good conversation if it's thought that our intentions are bad here. So when I walked in, I heard that the agenda here is to really damage private property rights, that we don't want you to have private property rights, that it's part of, I don't know, Agenda 21 or something. And if people believe that, it kind of doesn't matter what I say, right?
You declared war on property rights. That's
So,
what you did.
so if that's your belief, I don't think there'll be any value for me talking tonight. So declare war on
But
property. Okay, so
let's try and stop the
I'll do my
personal
best.
attacks.
I'll do my best for laying out how I saw all this. I start with the belief that we are deeply up against the wall in the Northwest, in the whole western United States, when it comes to wildfire. That we haven't been preparing, that all the trends say hotter, drier, more chaotic winds, and that we've seen, starting from Los Angeles, moving up in the last 10 years, community after community burn. That's my starting point. And that every decade in the last 30 years, the number of acres burning in Oregon has doubled. So the origin of this bill goes back 4 or 5 years to research in something called the National Cohesive Firefighting Strategy. And it's based on 3 parts. One is better response to wildfires and early response, the early detection cameras we have, all of that. There's no controversy over that I know of. And I think we really had a good wildfire season because of it. So I'll leave that part aside. The other second part is called resilient forests, and that has to do with the thinning and trying to lessen fuel in the forest that make these so hot. And I won't say there's no controversy about that, but I don't think that's the controversy that has people upset. It's the third part that does, and that's called fire-adapted communities. And that has become more the center of attention as we've watched Santa Rosa and Weed and Paradise and Phoenix and Talent and all of that in terms of what keeps a fire accelerating and moving more quickly than it can be fought in our communities. And that is what we do as humans. It's our yards, it's our homes, it's those kinds of things. That's what the Almeida fire was about, and it's something that we got to address, in my opinion. Now, where I disagree with people if they say, the whole problem is fill in the blank. The whole problem is BLM and Forest Service land that wasn't cut properly, and what happens inside our city limits in our homes is no issue at all. Or the other way around. Anybody who says it's all our fault, just our buildings, our yards, and let's not worry about the forest at all. I think these are all issues, and I think we're cooked if we don't address them. So that's where I start out. I'll talk for a couple more minutes, and then I'll shut up. So I think what happened on that Zoom call was I got a wake-up call when several people said, I didn't have a clue any of this was happening until I got a letter that said, pretty bad letter, your property is an extreme or high risk, expect to be regulated. By the way, we can't tell you what the regulations are because we don't quite know that. I understand why people would get really hot about that. I would have too. What I didn't realize was that it's the first time people knew anything about it. Now, and this is on me because I've spent every piece of communication I got, newsletters, Facebook, press releases, town halls, talking about this bill and how it was working. And we had every part of this bill has citizen advisory committees that have people on it. The leading private property rights advocate in the state is on it. The leading realtors and developers are on it. So that made us think, we're running this by people. This has citizen input. when people said on that call, I hadn't heard anything about it. I went, uh-oh, we did this wrong. We're rolling out the sticks, not talking about how we're going to help people doing good work on their property. That was done very poorly, and that's where the sequence is changing. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm going to oppose any kind of regulation of any kind on private property, because I think we have a responsibility to each other. I am going to say that there's a ton of good work going on out there already that we want to support before we finalize a map or regulate anybody on anything. And here's where we might have a difference of opinion. I think that our private property rights, which are critically important, have to be somewhat in balance with those community rights. And if there were people in Paradise saying, you know, I don't give a damn, I'm going to do exactly what I want with my yard, that was out of balance. So I guess I'll leave it there right now. I'm happy to answer. The one question I heard, I take zero from the insurance companies. I don't take a single dollar for a single corporation, company, or PAC. I am financed by individual donations. And I'm happy to try to answer other questions.
First of all, having a tree next to your house is a nice thing to have, you get your shade, stuff like that, and to say the tree has to be 100 feet away from a property is absolutely kind of ridiculous, because if you look at it, people have trees around their house, everybody does. My concern is about the kind of the trees, they have beautiful old growth trees, things like that. They're close to my place, that's why I live there. I've lived there for 40-some years. I chainsaw, I keep things clear, but if they regulation says they got to be 100 feet away from my house. Okay, that's one thing.
I would love to answer that.
And the second thing is, I used to be on a hotshot crew in California. What we used to do fire breaks during the winter. We also had loggers that made logging roads. And those logging roads were extended a lot. You can't log here, you can't log here, let nature take its course. Those trees could have been cleared, or could have been modified so that it wouldn't have been as much fire danger, and you had breaks throughout the whole forest with logging truck, roads, and things like that. We didn't have this issue 40, 50 years ago. No. And what changed? It just got a little hot. I'm not being offensive to you.
I feel offended.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
It's forest management. Over 97% of those fires start in the forest, not in the house, and not in the neighbor's house. When the city came down, when Phoenix and Talon caught on fire, is that in the high risk, or, you know, is Ashland in the high risk? And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying this is unfair. I can't afford to cut all those trees. That's why I live there. That's why I took care of that property for 40 years. My neighbors do the same thing. We take the risk for fire. We take the risk. My neighbors take the risk. That's private property. When we take the risk, we're willing to. We have an easement road that's like a fire break. And that comes across too. We have things around the property. So let's say I have it cleared all around my property, but I have trees that go around my property that are mine. So that's my.
We need to keep this a little bit more under control, or we're going to be here till tomorrow sometime. So we've got some. If we've got some questions for Jeff, I would appreciate that, and not a soliloquy.
Well, you gave me
5 acres irrigated land, surrounded by irrigated land, as is my neighbor. Okay, I've lived there for 42 years, those orchards have burned yet. My property is green. If this was a concise report, a concise map, you look at Google Earth, you wouldn't include irrigated land in a wildfire area.
I'm not going to stand behind that map. That map has, I've been walking properties. That map is goofy in all kinds of ways. And I cannot tell you why your property ended up on that map. But he just gave me some really, you said a couple of really important things. The first one.
We got 2 minutes.
I believe one of the biggest pieces of misinformation is what defensible space is and what you'd be expected to do in your property. This business about, I've heard, you want us to make a moonscape for 100 feet around our house. I've had a visit from a national firefighter who guided me on on defensible space. I wanted to know. I have some pretty big trees. I said, how about those? Those can all stay. In almost all cases, I won't say every one, mature trees stay. Some of them need to be trimmed up about 10 feet or so to avoid ladder fuels. Some of them hanging over houses or touching houses don't have to be taken, but they got to be pruned. But the business about how, you know, I live in the woods. Who in Oregon doesn't like living around vegetation? So I believe that some of what has been whipped up is based on false information about what's expected on fence. I'm sorry?
We have no rules to judge them.
Well, well, that would take, the reason, what I think is strong and important about this bill would take more than 5 minutes. And I'm in too much of a hurry, I admit it. Every single season we face, I think, a critical crisis. So the whole idea of this bill, this program, which Oregon has never tried before, it's broader, is that it had to be a compromise between trying to fine-tune it and get it all right and getting it on the ground as soon as we can. To do that, so that means you start and you course correct. And we've got something called the Wildfire Advisory Council, who has some members that I assure you would like and agree with, who are giving us feedback on how to change things. The map's going to be changed greatly. You know, the part about the utilities, the part about thinning in certain areas, the part about the early detection cameras. There's like 38 sections to this bill. And we need to, the part that's causing us trouble is what you're here about tonight. And we need some revisions on that. We're going to do revisions on that. Absolutely.
No, it says you have to trim trees to where the crown is 10 feet away from the structures around 100 feet radius of the house. So it's a 200-foot diameter circle around there. You can have trees in it, but it's got to be at least 10 feet away from the house or 10 feet space between the trees. You don't have to cut them all within that 200-foot circle.
And let me say one more thing. That isn't in the bill. That's in the proposed rules, which have not been finalized. And one of the ways we have not done our job is letting you know how you can have input on the rules before they're finalized.
Yeah, because the time frame for adoption of the clear space, the defensible space, is it has to be done this year before the map is finished. The folks are supposed to be done developing them by the end of October to where they go into effect by the end of the year. Yeah, defensible space is supposed to be completed by the end of the year. Hardening is supposed to be done of the rules being adopted and taking effect in April of next year.
Well, let me ask you this. There's still, public hearings are going to happen, I believe, here in this very room probably, and elsewhere. If you would like my office to let you know when, or to get on the list of when you can comment and talk about public rules, I circulate my clipboard and take your addresses to do that. Should I just send it to you, all the information to you, or?
You can.
Why was it? Well, you're going to get into a deep conversation about republic versus democracy and the nature of representative government. I don't know if how many people are willing to sit through hundreds of hours on these. Yeah. I can't.
We've discussed these issues in depth. You're aware of some of the we're aware of some of the severe problems in this bill. We've shared those with you and with many others. If you are reelected, will you stand up for rewriting the bill, repealing it, redo it again? A lot of us are really concerned that this thing is like a locomotive pushing down the road and there's no way to stop it.
Yes.
Even though we'll have public hearings and such, and be glad to talk to you again. We haven't had that opportunity as was promised. But what's your position on
rewriting or repealing this bill to do it right this time.
I'll be very straight with you. I will not support repealing this bill. I'm going to be totally straight. Revising, yes, and then, of course, what does that mean? And the revising, where I'm most interested in revising is on the defensible space. Not necessarily exactly what the rules are, but we need more public participation in the process. And if that means putting back deadlines, I can support that.
I appreciate you coming up, Mr. Gold. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I know we're going to be here forever if we just start opening it up. Mr. Sparacino.
Need to lower this. So, a lot of you probably do not know me. I've lived in Southern Oregon for over 40 years. I've worked for the Medford Police Department for nearly 3 decades, and I've spent the last 2 years as the mayor of the city of Medford. It's bills like this, Senate Bill 762, and there are various other bills in this type of legislation, is the reason why I'm running for this office. As mayor, I've witnessed firsthand numerous pieces of legislation that have been passed that affect municipalities such as mine with adverse impacts that aren't evaluated until after the bill is passed. Similar to what we're doing right now. I believe that, and no disrespect to Senator Golden, because I don't believe that he thought that this was going to blow up the way that it has. But I believe that these types of things need to have public input frequently and often and early. I'm a collaborative leader. And to me, I want the voices on the ground in my locality making decisions. I don't want decisions being made solely out of Salem. And maybe I'm Pollyannish in that way. But what I'd like to see is less of our control locally being taken out of our hands and moved up into Salem. This bill consolidates a lot of local control that was already on the ground. We heard from folks in Josephine County, and I'm hearing every day from our canvassers out on the road, why are we doing something that we already do locally? Why are we doing things that Jackson County already had rules and regulations in place for? Why are we doing things that Josephine County already had? We don't need to be doing that. There are good things in this bill. And Bob, you outlined this bill very well, so I'm not going to go over the entire bill. And I mean, the early intervention on a fire is fantastic. However, I believe that there's more that could be done for forest management and forest thinning. And, you know, fires may be getting more accelerant and more hotter, but we're also having more and more fuel loads in our forests. And we need to do something to address that. And granted, that's a federal issue, but we need to make sure that's addressed on federal land, private land, and on Oregon Department of Forestry land. I don't like how this bill puts a lot of the onus on the property owner, and the state doesn't have the same rules on their wildfire interface areas. I'd like to see that addressed. If I'm elected, those are the types of things that I would do along with the colleagues that I would have in the State House. I believe that this bill circumvented statewide planning goal number 7, which was the local planning input on hazardous mitigation, which was already in place, something we already have. And as we all know, the maps are gone right now, but they're coming back. The other thing that's coming back is the LCD is going to continue to make rules. And the senator's correct, there is input time, but I've also sat through several rules committee hearings as a mayor and realized we're sitting here and we're arguing, just like the climate-friendly, equitable community. We're trying to change those rules, and we got nowhere with it. And it looks like my city's going to have to sue the state. This is not good things. The input's not being heard at our level. And I'm all about local control. Why do we have county commissions? Why do we have city councils? Why do we have committees if all of the rules are going to come out of Salem? I think it's really important to have wildfire standards. I believe that's true. We do have an issue in our state with wildfire. And I do believe that early intervention, coordination, those are all fantastic things that need to occur because those are going to come from state assets. But locally, boots on the ground, people that can actually go to a property and evaluate that property and see whether or not it's 100 acres of irrigated land and should not be high risk. I'm concerned about the map that's already been out there. The bell has been rung. People have already all seen that map. And if I do all the mitigation I can, I'm still high risk, even though my house is now mitigated. How does that improve things? It doesn't change the hazardousness of my area. So I'm not so sure I'm a fan of having the map in general. I think there are better ways we can handle hardening the target of a flammable residence. So if I'm elected in November, I promise you I will do everything within my power to ensure that this is addressed.
We'll take a couple of questions like we did for Jeff.
She was first, but your hand's been up a long time, so I apologize, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Larry Grange, I live in Ashland, and Senator Golden, you and I have had a lot of correspondence over the past couple of years. I have a suggestion to make. I worked for Josephine County for 10 years, and I know how this public notice, public input process works. One of the tools that's available to all of us as public officials, so I'm retired now, but there's services that are available that will send a postcard to every address within a zip code. With one liner on it. Costs 25 cents, perhaps. Public meeting on this subject, on this date, at this location. Okay? Everybody in this room feels like they got blindsided by this, okay? And believe me, if we knew in advance that there was going to be an opportunity for public input, we would be there. We would have been there, yes. Just saying.
That wasn't a question, but thank you.
Myself, I think that our U.S. senators, Murphy and Wyden, we should be putting heat on them to get more money to Oregon for this kind of stuff.
I agree with you. And actually,
Instead of the money going overseas.
it appears that Senator Wyden actually has some commentary on forest thinning and has put some money towards that, which is a start. Well, and there's a point.
Lady in the back.
I was a social worker on tons of boards, part of committees that were to gain public information, to make these huge decisions that affected a large part of the Oregon population. Woefully absent was the information from the public that would be affected. And it continued to be that way. We need to not have partisan Portland and Salem on these committees where it doesn't affect them, it affects us, and we are 40% maybe of the cause, possibly, of these fires, 60% not our responsibility or our wheelhouse, but we are being punished and taking the brunt of the cost and the effect from this bill or whatever it is. That's not okay. I would go on a bus up to Salem. I would be part of an advisory, and I'm sure a lot of people here, if that was available to us. We are heavily affected down here, yes. So we need to be part of that process that is going to affect us heavily. And again and again, I saw on boards, the people that were affected never had their voices heard. They just weren't part of the process.
I agree with you, and it goes back to what that gentleman said. You need to make sure that there's a means and a mechanism to advise the citizenry affected. There is I believe it's a ballot measure 56 notification. If your land use is going to be impacted by a state law, that probably should have taken effect in this particular case as well. Sure.
Yes, Randy, if you're elected, would you like to have volunteers to help you guide you through this? Because I've been this because I have my business in high risk zone and it's full of all the material I thin from somebody else's property.
I think you could take that conversation out the back door. That's not going to help us here to, yeah, I'd like to keep this focused on this bill and what can we do. And it's good to have people here.
Having those intakes, and I was one of the people who got the letter to laugh, that's all I knew about.
Yeah.
That kind of shows how.
And that's one of the things that Randy mentioned. Being a land use planner, I am aware of that notification requirement. If a zoning change happens that's going to affect your property, by state law, we're supposed to be notified. The things that are being impacted by this bill are so onerous, it should have happened a long time ago instead of waiting till the horse was already out of the barn. So that's my.
How many more do you want me to take?
We'll take two more and then we'll move on to the next one.
Sir.
Since this is a state bill, the county and the state departments could have and should have been bound by these same rules, and they were exempted from it. For this to be a believable thing, it should have been included in all these restrictions, and besides that, under the Equal Protection Act, or clause, the utilities should not have been exempted from it. They're not a government entity, and if they're exempted from it and offered a way to retrieve their money, then the people affected by this should be able to retrieve theirs by an exemption or a reduction in property taxes to cover the costs of doing these things.
A response before we get to another question.
I agree. I think that everybody in the state should be under the same rules. You shouldn't have special rules for special entities. Like I said earlier, you know, the lands that are federal, state, and abut the WUI should also have the same rules.
If it was an important thing to do, that would have been included.
Right.
This is not important.
And you know, those rules may change, but again, I think that the bill needs to be rewritten.
I really don't feel that it's right that they passed this law without us even being able to vote on it. I mean, we're living in the United States of America, land of the free. If we wanted to live in a dictatorship, we would be in Russia, China, North Korea, Afghanistan, all of those countries that don't have any rights at all. And I just really think it's wrong that that was passed.
Should I take this?
Last.
Gentleman in the black shirt.
As was said earlier, I think that there's a rush to do it. There's need to get things done for this. But in a rush, we often make mistakes and have unintended consequences. And sometimes that's as simple as wording, remapping and changing the map stuff. Having spent over 2 decades in insurance and mortgage and real estate industry, I can almost promise you that insurance companies will use that wording on the map. Extreme fire danger. If it's zone 1 through 5, that's one thing. If they read it, extreme fire danger, it will be exactly what I saw in Grants Pass a decade ago, or actually more than a decade. And concerns about having to spend $15,000 or $20,000 to clear your property will be the minor item, because you will be paying probably $2,000 to $3,000 more each year for homeowners insurance ongoing. And when a potential buyer of your property can't get insurance on it because it's not available or it's too expensive, your home value just plummeted. And I'm just bringing it up because I've seen it, and I think it's one of those unintended consequences out of the best intentions that sometimes people don't realize.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening to me, and I really value your input. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a couple more speakers. I'd like to call Joe Ray Perkins, candidate for U.S. Senate. We asked her to come because we feel that this is a big issue. When I went through all of the background materials for this bill, when it was studied, it showed that 92 to 93% of the acres that have burned for the last 3 decades is federal land. So that's where we need to put some pressure. It's not all on the property owners. It's not all on the legislature. We have some work to do with the federal government, and we would like you to comment. Thank you,
Bob. So in case you missed it, my name's Joe Ray Perkins, and I'm running for the U.S. Senate to retire Senator Ron Wyden. All right, I even got the okie dokie from the dog. Yay. Good doggy. So when I was sitting in the back and I look at this, 92 to 93% of the acres burned. How many years ago was it that the spotted owl got put on the endangered species list? 30 years? What was stated in this room just a few minutes ago of how the fires have grown exponentially over how many of the last decades? 3 decades, 30 years. Is there a direct correlation? Yes, there is. What else happened during that time? Logging. How much is logging down on state and federal land? Tremendously. How much has that reduction in logging cost this community? Billions. Josephine County, billions. They can't even hardly fund a sheriff's department over there in Josephine County. This is absolutely ridiculous. Now, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution says, and I'm going to paraphrase it, the federal government can own 10 square miles Washington, D.C., other land for forts. Last time I drove through the forest, I didn't see forts. Place for arsenals, need-filled buildings, ports. That's about it. Land that they own by title is the other part. That the state legislators must agree to sell the land, even if it's for $1, that is considered selling it, to the federal government. According to people that I know, they've told me Crater Lake is the only land, only property in the entire state of Oregon that the federal government owns legal title to, as far as anything out there in the forest. This is my proposal, and it's going to go directly to this. The federal government does not have legal jurisdiction of that land, and they're a poor property manager. It needs to get back to the state and down to the county level. We need to start logging the timber again. The U.S. Forest Service has closed down the forest roads. Now, I heard Senator Wyden mentioned 41 and a half years he's been in Washington, D.C. Last year, Oregon was number 2 in the entire country of total acreage burned due to wildfires. You tell me how good of a job his plan is doing. It's not. If his job was working, friends, we wouldn't be having these fires. That's the bottom line. We have got to get the fires, the control of this land back into the hands of local people, back to people who care about the land. The loggers care about the land. Used to be when the loggers went out there doing their logging, they'd have a water tender. Used to be people were up on the lookout towers, right? Fire, bam, we're on it. Now, I just heard, and if this information given to me last week is wrong, please correct me. 2 weeks ago. Fire outside of Eugene, up Oak Ridge, up Highway 58, burning for 30 days. My first question is, why is that fire burning for 30 days? It started off being a small fire. Then we had that high wind event expected, and they start shutting down the electricity. And I'm going to tell you, I think that's a bunch of baloney that they do that, because, Bob, the one thing you didn't mention was people that are on oxygen machines. It's one thing for our food to spoil, it's another thing for grandma to die, right? Because they don't have their oxygen machines. But I asked why that fire burned for 30 days. When the town of Oak Ridge, 3,299 residents, were being evacuated. Suddenly, federal dollars kicked in. Kate Brown did not want to spend any state money. So all of this stuff up here, friends, it's irrelevant if that is the government's state plan. That they're not going to fight the fires until they can get federal dollars. This is where locally you need to say, hey, look, as soon as that fire is out there, we expect somebody on the site immediately. If it's aerial, get it out there. Get the helicopters up, get it out there before they create a fire tornado to where it's too dangerous to fly into that. This is ridiculous that we're asking men and women, 5 foot whatever to 6 foot whatever, to fight these towering infernos. This is dumb. This is something that we can sell to our environmental friends. In an average acre, over 200 different animals are killed. The trees sequester pollutants, methane, carbon dioxide, which, by the way, those trees give us back oxygen. Right? They need that. So we can talk to those. Who many in here does not love the environment? Everybody here loves the environment, right? Okay. So we agree with our friends that want to keep it green. But burning up those forests or not keeping it green is turning it black, and it is not good. And I'm afraid about the prescribed fires. That's the one thing that I read in this that I went, this is just craziness. We have to clean up the forest floor. We have to reopen the logging roads. That is critical. And when it comes to your private property rights, it's your private property. And you should have the right to control your private property. And I don't know anybody that doesn't love their property enough, such as what you've been talking about, sir, with keeping a fire break around your own property, because nobody in their right mind is going to let their property get to a place where it could burn down, not only their home, but thousands of acres. And I'm happy to take a question or a comment or anything real quick if anybody has anything. Yes, ma'am.
We lived there. My husband was killed several years ago, but I've done the farm with irrigated acres. I cannot get out there and do everything that they say that I have to do. But my property, I mean right there, here's my property line, there's a fence line, and there's county property. And it is so dense and so bad and so overgrown with fallen trees right beside my property that people even, because it's on a little road, people dump their garbage out. There probably is a body out there somewhere, and the county will not clean it up. They absolutely dumped gravel in front of where people were pulling it, backing up, and dumping stuff. They thought that would be a berm and a deterrent. That's not. And I'm surrounded by cartels as well, so stealing water. So what am I supposed to do? The fire came through. BLM was with less than a mile of my property. That was BLM property on the north side. On the west side is county property full of this mass mob of. I mean, it's horrible. I'm not kidding you. You can't even get through there if you had to.
So I wonder, and I'm thinking out loud, if you were to get together with a bunch of people and get that cleaned up and send the bill to the county.
I told her if she didn't get her grass cut in her field, they were going to come and do it for her and charge her $50 an hour. She's 92 years old.
Well, I think she should do the same thing and you know what, get a bunch of friends, write letters to the editor, go to the county commissioners, go to their weekly meetings, and be a voice, be a thorn in their side. And the last thing that I want to say on the bills, sir, they should never, ever be rushed through, ever. Our bills, our government was designed to not be rapid. It was designed to be slow and thoughtful and not rush. In very few instances should any bill at the local or all the way up to the federal level be rushed through. Every bill that I can think of off the top of my head that was rushed through was fought with problems on the back end that somebody didn't think about. They didn't consider all the ramifications. The bills should be done deliberately, slowly, thoroughly analyzed. And this bill here stinks of a Pelosi bill. You have to pass it to know what's in it. And that's what I saw in this bill. So thank you so much. I'm happy to hang around before I drive back up to Albany. I drove down to be here tonight to hear this. and I'll drive back up tonight, but this is worth it. It matters to me. It matters to all Oregonians. And by the way, the people who don't care about the forest probably live in the Pearl. Perkins.vote. Perkins.vote.
Thank you, Joe Ray. To give the county a chance to respond, we have Colleen Roberts here to make some comments and take questions.
Thank you, Bob. Yep, I'm Colleen Roberts. I'm from Jackson County. Should get me that address or send me a bill, one or the other. In response to Joe Ray's comments about the federal lands, I will tell you in Jackson County in 2018 after our big fires, our Board of Commissioners got on the stick and we wrote resolutions that says once it's fire season, declared state fire season, there will be no burning, nothing but initial attack and full suppression. And had we had any big fires in our county since 2019? Not a one. Our agencies have adhered to it. Our Forest Service supervisor at one non-government organization wanted to burn, and he said, no, it's fire season, and the commissioner said no burning. They have held to it, and we've had other counties smoke, but we have not had it from ours. And you know what else happened 30 years ago besides the owl? We have a 1995 wildland fire policy. I'm this close to getting it amended. In that policy, it says no matter what source of ignition, any time of the year, a fire can be allowed to burn. And that needs amended. Our Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary Vilsack, recently said in the Western Governors Association meeting that let it burn policy needs to be removed. And I've contacted his office every week. How can I help you? I've got some writing started because I don't think they know how to write it. So I'm going to get that done. Hopefully, I've contacted our congressman, Congressman Benz. If Wyden isn't there, I will get a hold of Joe Ray. We're going to get that rewritten. It needs amended. And it needs amended. We have a National Association of Counties. We have a resolution that says that the federal agencies need to coordinate their fire policies with local government, and the 1995 wildland fire policy needs amended. So I'm on it, and we're going to keep pushing forward on that. Now, about Senate Bill 762, there's so many things to say about it. I tried to limit it to 3. The biggest thing is there's been no real public comment. There's been stakeholders, and the state seems to think that's adequate, and it is not. There's been no local comment, and there's been no local government involved in it. We were not involved, you were not involved, and we're as concerned as you are. Whether it's the developing of the wildland urban interface, that was done without our input and without yours. Whether it's the wildfire mapping, that was done without your input and without ours. It was done with Chris Dunn at the Oregon State University, who's a regular speaker at KS Wild. And it has the top people that were in those committees, 1,000 Friends of Oregon, Rogue Advocates, Sustainable Northwest, and the Association of Oregon Counties. And maybe that's where the state feels we were represented. Well, you know what? We pulled out of the state Association of Oregon Counties. We were paying them about $100,000 a year, and they were representing us, and then we'd have to go try to fix what they didn't represent us. They did not represent Jackson County. So we do, and we're going to take that role very seriously at the state level. Secondly, what I heard in some of the meetings I attended with the state is that this was really in reaction to the 2020 fire season and how to help people to be prepared for wildfire. And you know, Jackson County was the biggest recipient of the fire of 2020. We had the most homes destroyed, we had the most businesses destroyed, but you know what? It wasn't a wildfire. It was still under investigation. It was arson. So how do you prepare us for criminal activity? Prepare us for the criminal activity. But, and also, what was I going to say about the fires? The fact that the Detroit fire, I went and toured the fire up there. You know what? I asked them, I said, what started your fire? It was a prescribed burn. And they said, oh, it won't be bad. We'll let it go. Well, that's what took out several of their homes. And of course, we saw that in New Mexico. It was a prescribed burn. And the prescribed burning does concern me, and I know it concerns our board. And I will tell you some of the actions our board has done. It's just not me, but our board, well, I sent in May, there was a public comment time about the wildfire risk mapping. But there was no wildfire risk map to comment on. And so I made that comment, how do we comment on a map we can't see? And our board sent a letter, said, please extend the comment period. Please slow down the aggressive actions of this bill. And we were, I think the only received comment we got back was, thank you for your input. So they didn't respond to our request to slow down. Our board also has responded to the recent DLCD rulemaking and our objections to what that means to our citizens. And we also commented on the burn certification program and the concerns we have there. We also commented on the wildfire risk mapping and a letter to the governor that says this is really way too aggressive. It has a lot of concerns that we have as a board for our citizens. So I guess what do we do next? And I guess that 1, voting and elections matter. And 2, public comment, like was said earlier by Kim Wallen, public comment makes a huge difference. Locally, statewide, federally, we've seen it change directions. And I just encourage you to be involved. I mean, our board is, but when you guys all got involved in the risk mapping, it made a difference. And I'm honored to serve a group of people that are involved and are engaged in your government, because you make what we do successful. And I just urge you to stay involved, stay writing, inundate when it's not right and it's affecting your property rights and our way of life in rural Oregon. Stay involved, stay tuned, contact me. I'll send anything you give me on or send it directly, but we need to inundate till they hear us, because it made a difference. And I just thank you for that. They need to get true public comment. And once we probably see a risk map, I know our board has discussed having a public hearing with you all once we have something to comment on. So we'll be reaching out to you for support and input as we also give our 2 cents worth to Salem. So we're engaged. I think there's a lot of, I think Senate Bill 762 is probably the biggest threat to our county, mainly through the administrative actions and the rulemaking that's moving forward based on a risk map that doesn't exist. So it doesn't make any sense, and I just urge you to thank you for being here and stay tuned in. So thank you. I don't know if I have any questions, but I'd take any. I just spout. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colleen. We've got 2 more speakers, and then we'll get to the last part of this, is that public comment. We've got an idea, you've got some papers, and I'll explain that. Sandy Abercrombie.
Thank you. 2 people, one in the House, one in the Senate. Our senator's here, but I don't see our Representative Marsh. Senator Golden carried this bill in the Senate. Representative Marsh carried it in the House. You want to stop it? Replace them. Pretty simple. Just don't vote for them, and they won't be there to do any more. Sorry, Jeff, but, time to go. So go to sandyabercrombie.com and share my website with your children and your grandchildren and their friends. Reach that demographic. I've got all kinds of information out there. And I actually have Senator Golden's speech on the Senate floor introducing this bill, if you want to look at that. the unreached part of the voting public, half of them are friends of my grandkids who grew up here. So I expect to win this time.
Thank you, Sandy. We've got one more, Emily McIntyre.
Thank you. My name is Emily McIntyre. I am actually in a new district with the new redistricting. I am the northeast quadrant of Jackson County. So essentially White City all the way up 62 to Crater Lake, and then I'm the west half of Klamath County. So there were no representatives in that district, and so here we go. So I stand on common sense, local control, and accountability. I second everything that my conservative teammates have said today. I will do everything in my power to work with the Republican caucus to repeal this bill. And if that's not possible, to make amendments that take the onus off of you and put it on the state where it belongs. So I feel like we have really talked about that. So I just want to give you guys some numbers. In 2018, Kate Brown won by, I'm going to round a little bit, but Kate Brown won by 120,000 votes. There were 50,000 undervotes, which means that people cast a ballot but did not vote for governor. There were 134,000 Republicans that did not vote. Our vote matters. It counts. You matter. You count. Who is Caesar in America? You, me, us. We have the power and the ability to take this back if we so choose. I'm going to read you one quote that really stuck with me. It's from President James Garfield. Now more than ever before, the people are responsible for the character of their Congress. If that body be ignorant, reckless, and corrupt, it is because the people tolerate ignorance, recklessness, and corruption. If it be intelligent, brave, and pure, it is because the people demand these high qualities to represent them in the national legislature. If the next centennial does not find us a great nation, it will be because those who represent the enterprise, the culture, and the morality of the nation do not aid in controlling the political forces. It is our duty to control the political forces, and we are the ones that should make that choice. So I just want to encourage you guys to vote.
Thank you, Emily. When we first did a meeting up in Grants Pass, we had almost 500 people in the room. I'd like to see that happen here in Jackson County, because this is such an impactful issue that we need everybody involved so people know what's going on. And to try and deal with that, we messed up at that meeting because we gave everybody a full understanding of what was in this bill, but nothing for them to do except wander out the door and shake their head. So what we've come up with are a series of comment cards. You've got some when you came in the door. You've got a couple of pieces of paper that kind of explained a little bit, and everybody gets 4 cards. And the 4 cards, what we want to do is send one to the governor, one to the Wildfire Council, one to your state senator, and one to your state representative. We've given 2 types of cards. One has a few suggestions on it that these are what we thought were major issues. And then we have another card that's mainly blank. Because when people testify and give your comment, you're going to make more impact if it's personal to you. So use these cards to pick the most dear to your heart issue to talk about. We want you to fill these cards out, leave them in the back. We've got pens
over there at that table so we can collect them. And what we're going to do is collect them and deliver them to Salem in a batch, because we figured that would have a more impact than have these dribble in one or two at a time. One of the things that the gentleman that couldn't be here, his name is Ron Smith, he said if you get a petition and have 500 names on it, that's one exhibit. But if you have 500 postcards, that's 500 exhibits. It makes a big difference by filling out cards. And if you have neighbors, I want you to take cards home with you and give it to your neighbor, explain what's going on, and have them fill out the cards. Just for convenience sake, the Republican office said that they would act as a depository, that they'll collect them for us. They're open Tuesday through Friday. Through Thursday. Okay, so they're not open every day, and they're not open till 9 o'clock at night. So, but we'd like you to drop the cards off there if you can't stay and fill them out tonight. Well, I'm working with Ron Smith, so if you are too burnt out to fill out another one, you are. It may reduce the count. So if you filled out a card in Josephine County, we're working together, so it's not going to go to waste. We're going to combine them and take them up in mass. One of the things we also want to do is contact Klamath County, Curry County, Douglas County. This is a statewide issue. We can't just stop here in Jackson County and say, well, here's our concerns, and that's it, because it affects everybody statewide. So please, if you have friends throughout the state, tell them about what's going on. We're trying to develop a website that will have a page for each county to deal with, and we're trying to expand this to make a bigger impact. And like Kim said and Jeff said, comments make a difference. So please fill those out. We have sample talking points of things that you can talk about on those cards. If there's something that came up tonight that you would like to have on there, fill it in. It's not limited to only these things. One of the things I wish Jeff was still here, because with the power of the pulpit, one of the things that I'm really concerned about is the conflict between rural fire issues and riparian habitat. You cannot modify the vegetation along stream banks. The Greenway acted like a fuse during the Alameda fire because that was so overgrown with vegetation that could not be managed. We need to have some coordination between Fish and Wildlife and the fire marshal so we can do some clean out and protect the fish, but also protect the people from the spread of fire. Now, if there's any other questions I can answer, I'd be happy to. Yes, ma'am. We'd like your address, because if you don't know your senator or representative, we can try and look it up and get it to the proper person. So we'd like to have physical address, if you could, please. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. We'll try and work on communication. Yes, sir. We'll see what we can do to try and increase our exposure so you'll know what's going on and what comes next, because it can't stop with tonight. We've got to keep going. Yes, sir.
There needs to be somebody contact the media, ABC, NBC, and CBS, Bill Meyer, and put this out on the news, on the TV news.
I talked to Bill Meyer this morning, and a little after 7, we were on for about 10 minutes explaining what was going on here. So I appreciate you coming. We'll try and get more exposure. It's hard to get people to pay attention. If anybody needs cards, there's more in the back. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming.